Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Liam Rose. I'm an author, mentor, life coach, motivational speaker, evangelist, musician, activist. In this new series for My Life is Like a Story series, volume 3, we're going to be talking about some very serious topics, and the reason why I'm sharing these information is to try to inspire people to help other people, give back and make a difference, go through a process of spiritual change, and also try to help humanity and the animals to learn about Jesus Christ, Jehovah and Buddha. So the first audio for this series is going to be called The Self, I. Now, I want to get this as clear as possible in the audio for the listeners who listen to this content. Now, the self I is where the suffering, pains and adversities come from. In our lives, we believe that we have a self within ourselves and an I within ourselves. What the self and I is normally my house, my cars, my money, my relationship, my family, my friends, my work, my career, my business, I, me, my. Now, it's important to realize if we don't change the I, which is the self, we're always going to be living in suffering, pain and adversity. So the self becomes a very destructive thing and a very negative thing. Right now in the society and in the world today, a lot of people are living for the self. They have no understanding of what spiritual change is or what no self is. So because many people are living the self, I, me, my, they never get the opportunity to help other people, give back and make a difference, or find their spiritual life purpose and their spiritual calling. Now, the most important thing to realize with the self is that it does cause suffering, pain and adversities. Each person that lives for the self will experience suffering, pain and adversity. So this becomes very important to realize, because if we don't overcome the self and the I, we can't go through a process of spiritual change and then discover the no self and no I, which is a spiritual transformation. So I'm trying to encourage the listeners and the viewers in this audio for the very beginning of this series. You need to overcome the self, the I, to understand spiritual change and the no self. If you don't overcome the self and I, then you can't understand spiritual change and the no self. So it's so important to overcome the self. And I've always said in my videos, my books, my messages, my talks that I've done within my life, the self becomes the most important, challenging, difficult thing to overcome, because a lot of people live their whole life living for the self, which is very destructive. It's not a good thing to do that. It's a very negative thing to live for the self and constantly keep worrying about yourself, complaining about yourself, just concerning your life with yourself is very destructive, is very negative. So the most important thing to realize with the self is that you need to go through a spiritual change. And the spiritual change becomes very, very important. This becomes the most important thing in life. Without going through the spiritual change, you will live for the self. And then if you live for the self, you'll always experience suffering, pain and adversities. And even when you're going through in your life, you could be a successful person, you could be a well-off person, a wealthy person, you could have family, friends, relationships, you could have basically anything that you dream of within your life. But because you're living for the self, you can't go through the spiritual change to discover the no self. And it's very important to share this. What Jesus Christ, Jehovah and Buddha wants us to do is go through a spiritual change to discover the no self. So if I should say this in the audio as well, which is very important. If If millions of people are going to live the self, which is themselves, their lives, I, me, my, then for those human beings and for those individuals, they'll never go through a process of spiritual change. And if they don't go through the process of spiritual change, then they'll never discover the no self. So I'm not telling people that it's going to be an easy journey to do this. I'm not telling people that, do you know what, like, how do you overcome the self and the I always live for the self. I always live for the I. But you have an opportunity now within your life to do it, and this is where spiritual change becomes very important, which we'll discuss in the next audio. So try your best in your life to overcome the self. If you overcome the self, I, me, my, if you overcome the self, then you'll get the opportunity to go through a spiritual change and discover the no self. So it's like what I said already in the audio. The self is where the destruction is. The self is where the negativity is. The self is where the suffering, pains and adversities are. So you have to overcome the self, go through a spiritual change to discover the no self, which we'll be talking about in this series. So I hope this message has helped. Please remember, the self and the I is where the destruction is and where the negativity is. So you've got to overcome the self to go through a spiritual change, to discover the no self and the no I. And this is very important in life. So thank you for listening to this message, and thank you now. Bye now.